Hey, I'm Pastor Stephen. Welcome to our study for our 6th through 12th graders. Today we're going to begin a new study in the book of James entitled Faith Works. As we dive into what it means to have a faith that works, let's talk about a faith that endures. And that's the bottom line for our study this morning. The faith that works is a faith that endures. James begins his chapter by saying, when troubles or trials come your way. Now notice he doesn't say if trials come. He doesn't say if troubles come. He says when troubles come your way. Life has a way of pounding on you day after day, and these are called trials. When you have difficulty or you have adversity, then you know you're in a fight. Sometimes we find it surprising that bad things happen to us. When life becomes difficult or when we face adversity, we tend to become surprised by it. We act like because we're Christians, because we're followers of Christ, we should always live a smooth and easy life. But we're deceiving ourselves. That's not how things work out. Nowhere in Scripture does it say that if you become a Christian, life is going to be easy from that moment on. Matter of fact, it actually probably will get a little bit more difficult. James continues by saying that these trials can lead to deeper joy, or they are an opportunity for great joy. It is very hard to look at adversity or look at the difficult things in our life and think, this is going to lead to joy. So a faith that develops endurance can overcome doubt. We look at verse 3. He says, for we know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. When we face adversity, there is a purpose for it, to develop endurance. There are two things that can happen when you face adversity and you develop endurance. And the first thing here, number one, it will lead to maturity. Look at verses 3 through 4 again. It says this, that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. When your endurance is fully developed, you become perfect and complete, needing nothing. Spiritual maturity happens through a process. Growth happens through experience, and most of the time through learning from your failures and shortcomings. Spiritual maturity happens the same. You learn to endure through adversity and overcoming difficulties. We grow when we endure. And that's what he's talking about here, is that spiritual maturity is something that happens when we allow our faith to be tested, or when we go through these difficult times in our life, this adversity that we have to endure. When we endure it and we come out on the other side, we grow because of it. And the second thing is, it will help you to be aware of your need for God. Look at verse 5. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and He will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. We often view our life incorrectly. When life is going well, we think that we've got it all going on, that we're doing a good job because our life is going okay. But when difficult things happen in our life, when adversity strikes, we often blame God and we go, God, why did you allow this to happen in my life? Why are you doing this to me? I'm your child. I'm your follower. I'm a Christian. Christians should not have to go through this. We view God often as a break glass in case of emergency God. We only realize we need Him when we face troubles. But that's not how we should view God. We should view God as someone we always need. We always need Him. Now, over time, doubt is created by the temptation of comparing ourselves to others. And this is what happens when we view God as someone that only helps us when things are going bad, or when we only need God when we're going through difficult times, or a break glass in case of emergency type God. We begin to look at everyone else and look at all of their lives and say, their life is okay. Why is mine difficult and theirs not? Especially in this Instagram, social media type life that we live in, our Facebook or our Snapchat or Instagram, whatever social media that you're a part of, we only post the best, right? We don't post our bad, difficult times. We don't post the negative balance we have in our bank account. We don't boast when our truck is falling apart or the bad things. Matter of fact, if we do that, it's because we want sympathy from other people. And that's not how we should be living our lives. Verses 6 through 11, we see that we cannot compare ourselves to everyone else. And if we do this, if we fall into that trap of comparison, then we begin to question why things are happening to us. So James says this, do not waver. We have to have confidence in God's ability to bring us through the difficult times that we face, or the adversity that we're fighting against. When we lose confidence, we become discouraged. That is why it is important for us to develop endurance in our faith. As time goes on, we see how difficult our lives are. Then we look around and see that God seems to be working in everyone else's life, but I don't see Him working in my life. That is when you fall into the comparison trap. When you see how God is working in someone else's life, but you cannot see the things that God is doing in your life. Because, face it, when you're having a bad day, when you're going through a difficult trial, when you're going through a hard time, when you're fighting against adversity, all you can see is what? The adversity that you're facing. You don't see the good that can come from it. And so when we think that we need to adjust our life to be like others for God to work in our lives, we get into a bad position, because then we start looking at ourselves as someone that constantly needs the approval of others. And that's not where we need to be. See, the rain pours on both the rich and the poor is basically what he says in verses 6 through 11. The just and the unjust. Comparing ourselves to others only fuels our own doubts and insecurities. When we start looking at others and trying to be like everyone else and trying to live our lives in a way like they're living, this Instagram culture, and trying to portray that, we end up falling into a deeper insecurity and a deeper sense of doubt, both in ourselves and then in God. So we see in verse 12, he says, God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. See, endurance is the key to lasting in just about anything. The more endurance you build up, the longer you can go. The same goes for your faith. The more endurance you build up in your faith, the longer you can withstand trials and tribulations, testings and temptations. And James makes it clear that God blesses endurance. When we can endure tribulation and trouble, we can endure trials and temptations as well. One thing that endurance allows is when you build it up, you do not compare yourselves to others. You know where you are, and you know where you have been, and you know what God has done, and you know what God is going to do. And that is a place that you want to be in. So when we look at the very first chapter and the very first part here of James, and we talk about a faith that works, you cannot have a faith that works if you do not have a faith that endures. And that's what we need to understand, is that we're constantly comparing ourselves in this Instagram social media culture. We're going to develop doubt, and we're going to develop insecurity about our lives, because our lives don't look like everybody else's on social media. But the reality is that behind every Instagram account, behind every Snapchat, behind every Facebook post, there is someone that is battling insecurity, battling doubt, and going through a difficult time just like you are. And that's why we need to realize that Jesus is the answer that we need to seek. That God can build our faith up, and we can have a faith that can endure any temptation, any trial, any tribulation, as long as we put our faith and trust in Him, and we have full confidence in God. So thank you for watching. Look forward to next week as we talk about this idea of a faith that develops endurance is a faith that can work. We'll see you guys next week.